Welcome to the Clinton School. My name is Nikolai DePippa, and I am the director of the public programs here at the Clinton School. Skip Rutherford, who's the dean, couldn't make it. He is in meetings out of state, but he sends his regards. First, I want to thank Clinton School graduate Nikki Hamilton, who, besides being a great supporter of the school, helped us connect with today's speaker, and we would have had him without her. To introduce our speaker is first-year Clinton School student Brad Cameron, a native of Conway, Arkansas, and graduate of the University of Central Arkansas with a degree in psychology. Cameron currently serves as the communication director at a disruption department, besides also being a full-time student here, which is an education technology nonprofit. At the Clinton School, for his group project, he's supporting the development of an experiential education program called the Learning Pass, which will allow students to access learning opportunities across the city, enable parents and teachers to track their students' engagement, and learning unique ways to make the entire city part of the learning community for the students. For his international project this summer, Brad's going to Uganda to evaluate a pilot program that's using video-based instructions for the teachers there. So please welcome Brad Cameron.
Good afternoon. In Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's A Study in Scarlet, Sherlock Holmes declares, "It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts." While teaching, I saw just how important data is for not only knowing where my students were academically, but also for developing instruction that would guarantee better student achievement. While developing a tech-centric education program for students in St. Louis, I was able to sit alongside middle and high school students during last year's National Day of Civic Hacking event and learn from teams of computer scientists about how they were creating data mining tools that would improve care for the homeless, access to public transit, and knowledge about healthcare options. With data, we uncover the likely story of what is and a roadmap we can follow to achieve what we want. Knowing the numbers, we can identify and avoid pitfalls between ourselves and our goals, and we can also more clearly communicate what we have done and what we would like to get done. What's more, as we enter an economy driven by information we see, just as market analysts have heralded and companies like Google and Axiom over there have shown, data is the new oil. Our speaker this afternoon has dedicated his career to data science and understanding how it can empower organizations and communities to improve their designs. Rayid Ghani is currently the research director at the University of Chicago Computation Institution, which creates robust analytics tools for professionals in a wide variety of fields. He is also a senior fellow at the Harris School of Public Policy, where he is researching how big data can be leveraged for public good. Obviously a very busy man, he somehow found the time to establish a startup called EdgeFlip, which employs the same analytics tools used to increase voter turnout and participation during the Obama campaign to improve outcomes for organizations dedicated to public good. I am so glad all of you have joined us today to learn more about how computer science, programming, and statistics can be brought together to reshape how we design solutions to public problems and more effectively use resources. Please join me in welcoming Rayid Ghani.
Thank you. It's really wonderful to be here. Glad all of you could make it. As I say, it's really summer here, so I'm really excited to be outside. So I thought, I'm sure all of you are here not to hear about all that, but the middle piece of the presidential elections, of what we did in the campaign. Why I'm here is not because of that. That was a long time ago. I want to kind of talk about how data can be used for good, because often what we hear about is how data can be used to target you to buy things you don't want to buy and make you click on ads that you don't want to click, and suggest friends for you on Facebook, because that is the most important problem we can solve today. So I decided we'll do compromise. I'll tell you a little bit about what we did in the elections, and then you have to suffer through the second piece, which is how data is used for lots of good things in this world. So my background is, I'm a computer scientist, so I know nothing about politics, I know nothing about policy, I sort of, like when I was a kid, I basically thought I want to do something good in my life someday. And then I started, I became an adult, and I found out that I really liked computers and I liked data. And so then at that point, I also figured out that I'm good at that. So I started doing computer science and statistics, and that's kind of what I ended up caring about for a long time, where I really wanted to solve hard problems. Doing good kind of took a back seat, because I'll do that someday later. And then I started sort of realizing that I actually liked solving real problems that somebody cared about. And that was motivating. It didn't really matter what that problem was. So for a long time, I spent about 10 years in the corporate world using data to improve how businesses worked. So how, you could help somebody figure out the right thing to sell you, and also do the same thing in healthcare and lots of different things. But then I got tired of that. And when I realized that it's the intellectual challenges of computer science and sort of hard problems are motivating, but without having an impact on people, it's just pointless. I sort of needed to merge my two lives of doing something good and doing something that I was good at, right? And that was sort of the struggle I faced for many years. Is weekdays I'm doing something that I'm good at and I find exciting, and then weekends I'm doing things that I feel good about and I care about. So I decided to sort of say, I'm going to quit my job and find something else that's more meaningful. And I didn't really quite figure out what it was. Accidentally, the Obama campaign came along. It started up a few blocks from where I used to work, and it's a very small community of people, who do things with computers and data in Chicago. And they heard that I was potentially looking for something else. So they approached me, and I thought, I'll jump in. I have no idea what this is about. I had no idea what political campaigns were like, what they worked on, and certainly no idea that I was going to be spending 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, sitting in an office in a windowless large room with this much space for each person, literally, not exaggerating. We had our desks where, we put tape to mark our spaces, and we had this much space. You couldn't do this, you couldn't do that. And it was a room about half the size and about 50 of us. So that was a year and a half of the campaign. So I think the exciting part about the campaign for me was that the impact was very real. There was a potential of an impact, and that's sort of the key in how data gets used in political campaigns. Is it's getting more and more popular, because in general, the way I look at data is it helps you be more rational. And if you're more rational, you're arguably making better decisions. And if you're making better decisions, you are more likely to succeed. And a political campaign is basically a lot of different decisions. In certain cases, we made millions of decisions. But at a very high level, the way we use data in the campaign was to basically increase our chances of winning. It wasn't necessarily designed to get us more votes, because you could win by getting just the right votes, not more votes, right? You could win by, so if you can imagine just winning 12 different states in the country and winning the elections. That doesn't happen because, again, those states are California, New York, Texas, so you can't really win all 12, they're big states. But you can imagine doing that. So what we did with data was that figured out what is our objective. And our objective is to get more than half of the electoral votes. It wasn't to win more votes overall. It wasn't to win 80% of the votes in Ohio or Pennsylvania or North Carolina. It was just to win 50.1%. Because if you get 50.1, you get all the electoral votes for a state. So you can even imagine that if you got 55 in a state that was a swing state and lost the election, you've basically screwed up. You spend too much money, too much resources in that state, that you shouldn't have done that. And so basically we use data to kind of figure out how much money are we allocating in each state? And by money, I sort of in general mean resources, right? How many volunteers are you putting in a particular state? And then once we had that figured out, the second step was, what are you doing with those resources? And the way we looked at the world was we sort of looked at, we have all these different voters. And And the way you can win elections and win votes, there are only 3 ways you can do that. You can register new people to vote. And if you do that, you get a completely additional vote. Now, you have to make sure that the people you're registering are likely to vote, more likely to vote for you than the other side, because otherwise you're giving away a vote. The second way you get a vote is you persuade people, which is the part which the big media attention is on, are the swing voters. And that's a very small number of people. You've got very, very few people who can actually be persuaded, even though that's where all the attention is. That's not where all our attention is, because the third part, which is getting people to vote, in general, people are lazy. So you have to really get them to go and vote. And that's a huge part of what a political campaign does, is just get people out to vote. They already like you, they support you, but they're not going to go vote. And so in the US, 50-something% of the registered voters actually vote, which is pretty low compared to other developed countries in the world. So that's a big part of our work. And so in order to do these things, we need two big things, right? We need a lot of money, and it's about $1 billion of money, and we need a lot of volunteers. And that's we had about 2.25 million volunteers. So a political campaign, at least in our case, was we start with a little bit of money and a little bit of volunteers, and we use that to sort of keep getting more money and more volunteers. And once we have enough, we start registering new voters, persuading existing voters, and then going and getting them out to vote. Now, where data comes in is we can do these things in many, 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 many ways. We can send letters to people, we can do TV ads, we can send emails, we can use Facebook, we can use Twitter, we can use the internet, we make phone calls, we knock on doors. So you've got all these different ways in which you can get register voters, you can persuade people, you can get them to vote. But you also know a lot of things about people. You know who they are, you know what elections they've voted in, you know if they've given you money, you know if they get emails from you. So the overall role of data is to sort of take all this information that you know about people and figure out how to use all these different tools that you have, volunteers, email, internet, TV ads, in order to win the election. So that's kind of the big data problem of how do you take all this information that you have about people. And to be honest, there isn't that much information we know about people. The big information that's available is your voter registration form, which when you fill out, you put your name, address, phone number, age, and in some cases party affiliation if it's it's in certain states. So all we know is these things about you and what elections you voted in. That's public information. We don't know which side you vote for. It'd be nice if we did, but we don't. So we take that. And then we add other things. When we call people, we ask them who you're going to vote for. When they give us money or volunteer, we get that information. So we take that and then we figure out how do we best figure out how we should target you for what goal, and then who should do that and how often and all that stuff, right? So the way we deal with that information is we take every voter in the country. So what used to happen in the old days was you would say, this neighborhood is, they're generally people here who support Obama. So let's focus our efforts in this neighborhood to get them out to vote. And that's great, that works. But the problem was that was inefficient, because even though this neighborhood is in general, people support Obama, but maybe there are pockets which don't. And if you're kind of going after everyone, you're wasting a lot of effort going after people who are not really your target group. Same for people who you might think, these people are probably unregistered, but you can't really know individually, so you're targeting large groups. So what people started doing is then defining these profiles. It's okay, anybody over 50 who might be an African American who lives in this neighborhood is probably a supporter. And so you start targeting, again, broad groups, but slightly more detailed. And that was great, but you still are being fairly inefficient, because eventually a lot of the work happens when you go to somebody's house and knock on their door. An individual is going to come out. And if you are wrong about that person, you're again wasting a lot of your effort. So what we did was we took every voter in the country and looked at this data to figure out, to predict their actions, to predict three things about them. To predict how likely they are to be an Obama supporter. Second thing we predicted was how persuadable are they, and how much can they be persuaded to vote for Obama. And the third thing we predicted was how likely they are to go and vote. Are they, for anyone, doesn't really matter, are they going to go and vote? And the way we did those three things were we collected a lot of data, and we sort of found the way these typical things work is you take a small number of people who are going to take some action. So if you can take polling and take some number of people who are going to vote for Obama, you can take a small number and basically build a profile that allows you to take everybody else in the country and get them the same score. You can we have everybody scored between 0 and 100, and 0 was, strong Romney supporter, 100 was strong Obama supporter. And everybody in the country kind of fell in between those two things. Same for people who are persuadable. So one of the things that people used to do was that they would kind of assume that, people in the middle of that range are the undecided people, right? So we can go after them and try to persuade them. Turns out the people in the middle of that range are not necessarily, they're in the middle, but they may not be persuadable. You can persuade all you want, but they're going to stay right there. They're not going to move. Whereas somebody who might be a little bit over here, might be much more likely to be persuaded in either direction. So what we started doing was we ran lots of tests to figure out who are the persuadable people, not just the people in the middle, but across the board. And then once we could figure out who these persuadable people are, we can then assign a score to everybody in the country again on how persuadable they are between 0 and 100. 100 is very persuadable, 0 is not persuadable at all. And so then when we have our volunteers go and talk to people, we could sort these people, most persuadable, least persuadable in every state. And in every state we'd start from the top and go down, talking to everybody based on what their score was. And the third score we had about people was how likely they are to go and vote. And the way we use that data is then, now imagine the world where I only know if you're a supporter and if you're going to vote. So now if you break the world down into four buckets, right? There are people who are not supporters, not going to vote, supporters going to vote, supporters not going to vote, and supporters going to vote. So there are these four kinds of people. Now, somebody who's not a supporter and not going to vote, ideally what you want to do with them is get them to first support you and then go and vote. Now that's a lot of work, and that's a lot of money, and that's a lot of resources. If you're going to do that, you might not be able to do other things. So what you do is you kind of just leave them alone, because it's just not worth the effort. You don't have the money, you don't have the resources. If you had infinite amounts of money, you would do that, right? But you don't. So you move on to the next bucket, and the next bucket is people who are not supporters and definitely going to vote. Most of them, it's very hard to persuade them to change their mind, right? You're not going to get them. So what you do is find the small sliver of people who you predicted are persuadable and target them to try to switch over their support to support you. The third bucket is people who are supporters and not going to vote. And those are people interesting. Those are people who, are excited about Obama, really think he's got the right policies, but they're lazy. They're not going to vote. So what you don't want to do with them is tell them good things about Obama, because they already believe you. That's not going to change their mind. What you do with them is try to figure out, how do I get them to vote? So the messaging is more around why voting is good for you, and why voting is good, but not as much about Obama. So what we do there is we try to do experiments. Try to figure out, what can I tell people that will make them more likely to vote? So we try things that are often, there's this whole area of behavioral psychology, which is basically persuading people to do things. And one of the very simple things that people do, it's called social proof. And the way it works is that you tell people, if you tell people a lot of people are doing something, they're much more likely to do that, right? So take this completely ridiculous example, which is actually true. So you tell people, you know what, nobody's voting in your area. Your vote really, really matters. You should go and vote. And compare that to everybody's voting. Your vote really matters. You should go and vote. This one wins. More people vote if you tell them this. Even though factually this one is more correct, right? Because if not enough people are voting, your vote matters more. But people get more persuaded by saying, everybody's voting, your vote matters, you should go and vote. So we sort of take those kinds of, we do those experiments to figure out, does it actually increase people's likelihood of voting? And if it does, we then use our volunteer training to help them train them to say what to say to people when they go to these, have phone calls or conversations. Another tactic is called make a plan. And so the way it goes is you go to, a volunteer goes to your house, knocks on your door, you open the door and say, hey, elections are coming up on Tuesday, just wanted to remind you and ask you if you knew where your polling location was. And you're probably gonna say, yeah, I know where it is. So then they're gonna ask you, okay, are you going there by bus? Are you driving? Are you walking there? And you start thinking, do I really know where it is? How was it? And maybe you say, yeah, I'm gonna walk there. And you say, okay, great, are you gonna go before work? You're going to go lunchtime or after work? Then you start thinking, okay, well, I've got a meeting at lunchtime. I need to pick up my kids after work, so probably I'm going to have to go before work. And so what's happened during this interaction is your probability of voting has increased during this interaction. You are much more likely to vote after this than before this. And once we figure this out, we then put this into a script that we then give out to our volunteers who go out and knock on the doors. We have specified, we know which people are likely to be supporters and unlikely to vote. And so we identify those houses, and then somebody goes there, they get this script to talk to them. And so these are the kind of experiments we do to figure out what moves people to do certain things, and then we implement them through training things. So at the end of this, we can take every voter in the country, and by the country I mean swing states, because if you're not in a swing state, a political campaign is not trying to change your mind about voting. We're asking you to give money, to volunteer, and lots of other really valuable things, but the voting things are really, really targeted towards swing states, obviously. And so even to the extent where if you look at how much money is being spent on TV ads, in California, for a presidential election, you spend, pennies per voter. In New Hampshire, you're going to spend, or Nevada, you're going to spend $6, $7, $8, $10 per voter on TV ads. So that's how much focus is there on swing states versus non-swing states. Because again, the goal is to win electoral votes and not to win the popular vote necessarily, which, happens in either direction. So the way, we take every single voter, and we figure out these things about every voter so that we can then go and target them individually for specific things. For these people, we're only targeting to get them to vote. These people, we're only persuading. These people, we're only registering. And then we're doing all our work around trying to do fundraising. And fundraising, $1 billion, it takes, all sorts of things, right? So in our case, fundraising was mostly through email. We raised about $600 million through emails that we spammed the hell out of everybody in the country, right? We just kept on spamming. Now, I used to apologize for that in the beginning. When I started working the campaign, a lot of my friends would email me and complain, like, hey, why are you guys spamming us? Because it's possible that people get upset, they start ignoring emails, they start unsubscribing, and then we're not going to be able to make money afterwards. And so I would apologize, yeah, we're working on something. So we thought, well, let's try an experiment. Let's try reducing the amount of emails you get. And the hope was, if I reduce the amount of emails, then you are more sensitive to the emails. In the beginning, you don't unsubscribe, so then when we bring you back to regular, you're sort of giving us more money. So we took a few million people and reduced the amount of emails we sent people. And we of course lost money in this period because we weren't sending people email, they weren't giving us any money. But then we brought them back up and started sending them more emails, and it turns out we never caught up. The people who we were being nice to didn't respond back. They just, didn't do that. So then we had this painful moment where we said, like, well, maybe we should try increasing the amount of email we sent, because we arbitrarily picked this number, and we were doing, something, and we reduced the amount, so it hurt us. Let's go the other way. And that was painful and very controversial, but we had to push through and try that experiment. And it turns out, what you would expect is if you are not sending any email, you don't get any money. If you're sending emails once a second, you don't get any money. It's sort of something like that, right, where there's this curve. And it turns out when you start sending more emails, we got to this point but we never actually even got to the flat point. It turns out you send people more email, they give you more money. Now, they also unsubscribe more, but not enough to make it matter. So what we found was that you could find this balance of emailing people more. And because also, if Amazon were to do that to you, where they would email you 6 times a day, that's probably going to hurt Amazon in the long term. But we were only looking at things up to a specific date, so we could push a little bit more because money to us in September 2012 was not more important than January 2013. It really wasn't going to do anything for us afterwards. So we could afford to do that. But we also sort of figured out lots of other ways. So by sending more emails, we probably raised another couple $100 million. So I stopped apologizing afterwards when I figured that out. It's like, it wasn't my fault. We tried to do the right thing. You guys told us that more email is better because you gave us more money. So we're going to continue to do that. Another way we used one of the things we were really struggling with in the campaign was reaching younger people, because most of our efforts were really, TV ads and direct mail and phone calls and knocking on doors, and all those things were really who is under 30 and has a landline phone or at home in daytime. Or watching live TV in most cases, right? That's just not. So we really were having very hard time reaching younger people. And as much hype as you hear about the Obama campaign and social media, our social media plan was put something on Facebook and see what happens. For a long time, we just kept putting more and more things. And so what we did was we built this tool which was really on top of Facebook, the same way we would do things in the field, where we would ask people, hey, talk to these friends or neighbors or relatives about this particular thing. We built the same thing online, where we got people to give us access to their Facebook information, or who their friends are. We could look at that Facebook friends and figure out which friends should you talk to, and which friends can you influence? Because if I have 600 friends, well, they're not really all friends. They're people I might have met once. I really don't even like them. They might be an ex-boyfriend or a girlfriend. I don't want to talk to them. So who are the people you can really influence? And in real life, that's very hard to know, because I can't really look at the people you can influence easily. I have to sort of look at each person and spend a lot of time. Whereas in the Facebook world, I can take everybody, and if they allow me to see their friend list and how they interact with each other, I could predict that you are very influential with these 6 people. So what we would do is we would run campaigns such as, if registration in Ohio was ending tomorrow, we would say, hey, it's ending tomorrow, here are 6 friends who live in Ohio, are probably not registered to vote, will probably vote Democrat if registered, and we think you are influential with them. Can you ask these 6 people to go register tomorrow? We could do that for registration, we could do that to persuade people, we could do that to get them to vote. And so we were basically, everything we would do on the field, we tried to copy that and do it online, because we could be reaching very specific set of people that we couldn't reach otherwise. And so once, all these things were we sort of figured out that you can take all these people who are passionate about a cause, which was Obama and the elections, and really direct their passion in very targeted ways using data and using technology. When we were done with this sort of elections, that was for me sort of the big lesson, is that people are passionate about certain causes, and if we can get them to mobilize around something as polarizing as elections, what about if we try the same thing in sort of other larger social issues where it's less controversial? You're passionate, and so that's the kind of work we started looking at some of the people from the campaign as well as other people looking at how do we take some of these same ideas around, if I have all this data about people, can I use that data to target different kinds of issues? So can I take students who are not likely to apply to college but are capable of graduating a 4-year college? Can I target those people? Can I figure out who they are, and can I target them to help them get to college? Can I take people who are likely to have some sort of a disease in a hospital? Can I look at what the early warning indicators are, and can I target those before they actually become fatal? Can I look at which community groups are at risk of certain kind of behavior, and can I design things that can help them get there? So that's sort of the second part of what I wanted to talk about is what we started doing. So I started running a program at University of Chicago that was basically designed to get students who had sort of similar skills as mine, sort of people who like computers and data and statistics, but also like to interact with people instead of sitting behind a computer all day, and try to get them a path forward. Because one of the struggles I had was I didn't really know how to do something useful. If I would go to a nonprofit and say, hey, I'd like to help you, they would say, yeah, you can paint that wall if you want. And so I wanted to kind of give people a chance to say, okay, here's a sort of a way for you to interact. So I started a program at the University of Chicago called Data Science for Social Good. And the idea was to bring in so last year we brought in about 40 students from around the country who were mostly grad students, and we created projects in partnership with nonprofits and government organizations. And the idea was they spend 3 months working on these projects in partnership with these organizations, so that one, they become slightly more aware of what's out there other than Facebook, Twitter, Google, LinkedIn, all the different hedge funds. And so instead of sort of moving money around and making people click on ads, how about doing something slightly more meaningful? And the second thing was that all of these organizations weren't really, they had needs, but they didn't really know how to think about data, how to think about their problems. So the summer was really spent on working on these things. I want to quickly show you a video because I want to kind of give you a feel of what kind of students we had and what people. Data Science for Social Good Fellowship is really to take data scientists and train them to work on problems, to solve problems that actually matter. And what I mean by that is people who have computer science and statistics and economics and policy and analytical skills, giving them an environment where they learn how to not only solve real problems, but focus on problems that have social impact in areas such as education and energy and healthcare and transportation and public safety. So what we wanted to do was build this hybrid person who has all these different skills, but also understands how to take real problems, communicate with people about those problems, solve them, and then help figure out a way to transfer and transition those solutions into the real world to the partner organizations. I
saw this advertisement for the fellowship, and it said data science and social good. And I thought to myself, wow, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Something that has all the neat data, technology, those interesting problems, those fun problems, those hard problems, but problems in the area of social good, something that is able to improve people's lives.
I heard about the program through my advisor. It really pulled me in since the beginning just because I understand the amount of good that you can do with a little bit of data.
The reason that we're doing this program with Argonne and the University of Chicago, and the reason that this is the right place to do this, is that this is one of the few places where we have the right expertise in the systems sciences and in the social sciences to bring together and to answer these questions in a way that's much more holistic than just looking at one or the other.
My background is in astrophysics, and I found that coming from the hard sciences to this program was a really interesting transition because I was still working with students, but I was doing so in a way that was expected to produce results rather than just papers.
I'm working with Nurse Family Partnership. They're a home visitation program. They send nurses into the homes of at-risk women, first-time mothers.
My team is working with a new government organization called the Cook County Land Bank. We're creating a new analytical tool to help the organization decide which properties to invest in to have the greatest impact in reversing neighborhood decline.
Our project this summer was working with Mesa Public Schools to identify cases of missed educational opportunities and ensure that students go to colleges that best serve their educational potential.
My team is working with the CTA. We're working on a problem that affects a lot of people around many cities, which is crowding on buses.
There have been a lot of learning lunches, a lot of talks, and a lot of just person-to-person opportunities to hit the whiteboard and to be learning different programming tools, different packages within tools.
A lot of people, when they came in, they really cared a lot about technical problems. And what you sort of notice is they start talking to our partners, they go out in the field and see how these things get implemented, how the data is actually collected. So they went from thinking of a spreadsheet or a database as a data set to actual people behind them, actual stories.
To provide these women with a source of support and health education.
Hopefully this will make bike share a more viable part of our public transit system.
By inferring a lot of these funding relationships, we let nonprofits spend a lot less time searching for information on the web and actually doing the work that they're trying to do to make the world a better place. Thank you for your time.
We started off from such different backgrounds, from such different parts of the world, and we've really come together with this common purpose and goal.
You'll spend your mornings at City Hall working to understand the problem the city faces, then afternoons coding together as a team trying to solve that problem. Each day is so full and fulfilling, you can't wait for the next one. I can't think of a better way to spend your summer.
I wish I could do DSSG for the rest of my life, honestly. It's been a lot of fun, and this is the kind of work I want to do. I'm interested in applying quantitatively grounded analyses and ways of thinking to problems that, really keep me up at night, to problems that I think really matter.
But I think that the bigger picture for me was trying to get people an idea of how data and technology can be used to do good things, right? Because we're often hearing about, as I said, all the things people are doing in targeted advertising and data mining and the government NSA snooping on our data and all those different things. What you often don't hear about is the same techniques are useful for doing all these things, where it's not just about looking at data and trying to find, private things about people. It's about making lives better. And by using data, you really are able to do that in a much more effective way, because a lot of people mean well, but they don't know where to target their efforts. And I think the key with data is that you can target your efforts in the place where it can have the most impact. So you're not wasting effort, just like we did in the Obama campaign, just like retailers do and marketing people do, in trying to find the people who are likely to make use of services. Nonprofits and governments are exactly in the same place. So right now, we're working with a lot of different city organizations who have services they provide that they want to target in the right places. They don't know which ones to do first. So we're working with public health department in the city of Chicago. And one thing they often struggle with is when there's an emergency happening, where should they target their efforts? They sort of just go with whoever calls first, right? Whoever's calling first gets the first response. And what they should be doing is being more proactive and saying, well, where are people with the most need who may not even be calling? And if I can start targeting those people, I can be a lot more effective. So that's kind of what I thought I'd describe to you, some of the work that we did in the Obama campaign around how do we take a sort of a larger goal of winning an election and then kind of translating that to how do I interact with each individual, but then taking the same idea over into the policy space where we figure out what's my larger goal. Is it a better society? Is it better educated kids? Is it healthier kids, healthier adults? And then apply the same kind of ideas around, can I target people at an individual level? Can I predict what they're going to do next? And can I design interventions that can help improve things for everyone? And hopefully by using data and kind of working in partnerships, because it's not, data happens to be a tool, right? It's not the actual, the real work is really happening on the ground with community organizations. So how do you marry the two? How do you let community organizations do what they're really good at, is interventions and to design these programs, but how do you help them target the programs using data? That's sort of the kind of idea that we're working on, both at the university as well as other things. So I'm happy to take questions, answer any other questions you might have, and I'll be around a little bit later as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that. We do have time for some questions, so if you raise your hand, we can get a microphone to you. Nope.
Yeah, if you need to contact me, feel free to email me afterwards as well.
Thank you for being here. Could I ask a question in between the extremes of a presidential election and doing good in communities? Have you had experience with using these principles relating to state or local ballot issues, some of which may not be popular, but may be for the public good?
I personally haven't done anything kind of in between in that area, but I think it depends on, so a lot of people are looking at how do they apply something that was done at a very massive scale in a presidential election. How did that happen, at a slightly lower level? And some of those are certainly reasonable to think about. Some of those are just things that are just not possible to do at that small scale. So the larger the scale, the easier it is to use some of these techniques, and the smaller it is, the less efficiency you gain from doing it through these types of tools. But there are people looking at that. I haven't really done that much work there, but happy to sort of talk afterwards and tell you more about that.
I'm somewhat intrigued by the willingness of people to engage with a door-to-door volunteer, because that's not been my experience. So could you speak about how you did get people to engage and elicit that kind of information from them?
Yeah, that's a good question. And when I talk to people outside the U.S. and they hear that in our campaign we had 2.5 million volunteers, do 150 million contacts through phones and door knocks, that's just alien in any country outside the U.S. It just doesn't happen. You don't get volunteers, you don't get canvassing for elections. But it's surprising, it's just cultural. We are used to that and we accept it as normal. Now the contact rate overall has been declining over the years. Part of it is because people don't have the time, but part of the part is that people are just not home in daytime, so I think that's going to start changing 3-4 years from now, when 3 years from now the next elections are going to happen. It's going to be, I think, door to door is going to become less critical. You're still going to have to figure out. What we sort of found in the campaign was that the best person to persuade you was not the campaign. It wasn't the organization. It was somebody who is just like you, your friend, your relative, your neighbor. So I think it's the persuasion is still going to happen at an individual level. Now the challenge is, how do I take my 2 million people and help them do that efficiently? Right, so I think we're going to have to figure out new ways to give people the information. Say, hey, here are the 30 people around you should really be persuading. You don't have to go door to door. You can, when you run into them at a dinner, if you see them at a restaurant, if you're, going to a salon and you see them. So I think it's how do I give this information to the volunteers and then let them take over from there, because we can't really tell you where these people are other than their homes, and they're not there. So I think that's what's going to become more and more is, we'll have to figure out who you should talk to, but then leave it up to you to sort of find the best time and place to do that. And I think that's where I see things going in the future.
Hi, I know from reading some of these books that I know that we still tend to think of campaigns and how well they're doing as being based on polling data, like where you make telephone calls, you've got a poll coming back in, and that's how you say, okay, we're up 5 points versus our opponent. And from what I've read in other books and similar instances, like Sasha Issenberg's book, is that you're not using this model. You're doing something different to determine how well are we doing in the polls, or not even the polls, but how well is our campaign going to do on Election Day. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So that's a good question, and I didn't talk about that, but So for people outside the campaign, polls are kind of like sports scores, right? You sort of, I have 3 months left. Like, am I winning? Am I losing? You sort of every day you wake up and there's a newspaper and there's some poll and you're seeing what's happening and you're happy or sad. For us, so one thing, those polls are kind of mostly random. They're random because they are done on a very small number of people. So you see random fluctuations. Internally in the campaign, the way polls were for us, the way we were looking at the world was pretty flat. We were sort of going that way for a long time. And then we had, Romney said 47%, and we started going up. And then Clinton gave a speech. We went even there. And then the first debate happened. And that happened. And that point was critical because we didn't know it was just going to do that or it's going to flatten out again. So that's where the polls for us was sort of, we would do our own polls. And still the best way to figure this out is polling, but we wouldn't just do random phone calls, which is what a lot of people, the random polls are random phone calls. We would call specific people and a certain number of people and balance out our so if you call people, if you call people in daytime on a landline phone, you get slightly older people than average, so you miss younger people. If you call people in English, you get people who speak English, so you again have a biased sample. So what you do is you try to correct for that and say, hey, I'm going to try to figure out, instead of getting, if 20% of voters are younger people, I'm going to poll 40% of them, because half of them won't respond to my calls. If 20% of the population is Hispanic in the voting population, I'm going to poll twice as many. Especially the younger Hispanic people, I need to get a lot more so I can fix my answer at the end and get the right answer. So we spent a lot of time, we had a team of people who were just looking at how to do better polling and get the right answer. And it turned out at the very end, when we compared our answer to the truth, we were much more accurate than pretty much any poll out there. But that required a lot of time and a lot of effort. And especially it needs to be done very quickly, right? So at the very end, when we were doing this, we needed to decide where we're putting our resources, which states are we doing that in, and should we focus on, should we panic because it's going to change sides, or should we just say we're doing the right thing, let's continue going? And we were basically able to run those polls really quickly and predict that we're going to be fine. We don't need to panic and change our strategy because the people, we were artificially inflated in the middle. The people who we predicted were persuadable got persuaded just for the other side, but we'll be fine if we just keep going. And that was because we were able to adapt to that pretty quickly.
Yes, sir. Coming to you.
Would you talk a little bit about data quality and the level of sophistication that an organization has to have in that area in order to do a successful project?
Yeah. The easy answer is, any data is better than no data. So if you had perfect quality, no data versus not perfect, lots of data, I'll take lots of data over no data. But that requires having smart people who can make sure that that data is useful, right? So for example, a lot of people these days are sort of, Twitter, it has become, like, everybody uses Twitter for strange things. So there are a lot of city governments who look at Twitter and say, including Chicago, where they say, oh, I'm going to use Twitter to figure out where food poisoning is happening. And it turns out food poisoning only happens in sort of richer, whiter areas. So that's interesting. How does that happen? I should really look at more restaurants in this area because those are the restaurants that have food poisoning. Well, it turns out you're using Twitter. Who are you going to get complaining on Twitter? So lots of data, but not bad quality, but you just don't. So you can take the same data, combine that with food inspection data, and figure out the right answer of where it's actually happening, but then you need people who are looking at that. So data quality is absolutely critical, but not something you should, I think in the beginning it's let me collect as much as I can. So in the Obama campaign, we spent a ton of time putting data together, right? So we had data coming from voting records, we had data coming from fundraising, volunteer records, from our TV spending, our email systems. And pretty much the first thing we did was let's put it all together. So this person we can see has voted for, even each state has their separate voter databases. So we had to put all them together because this person who used to live here has now moved to this state and has now moved to this state, putting it together to say, they voted in the past 6 elections as opposed to, this person has never voted before. And then even when doing fundraising, we would do silly things like, we sent emails to somebody saying, somebody just gave $10,000 in an event yesterday, and then we emailed them the next day saying, hey, would you please give us $5 or more? And that person would rightly, complain, I just gave you $10,000. What are you talking about? Because our data there was a database for events and there was a database for email, and this person had never given the money on email. Just by putting it together and asking for the right amount raised us another probably $10, $20 million. Now, it's not a huge number, but a small effort of just putting things together gets you pretty good ROI in a lot of these things. So it's important to have good data, but it's not a limiting factor to get started, because once you get started and start doing things, you can prove the value of that data and then kind of get more investments to then improve the data and keep going.
I'm going to come to you next. I've got a follow-up to that was just popped in my head. I'm sorry, we'll get to you next. I have the microphone, so I can do that. On that same kind of vein, a lot of our students will work with small nonprofits, and there's a ton of small nonprofits under 100,000, 200,000 revenue. And so this seems great for a $1 billion operation. How can these same principles be applied for small so that that limited number of resources that they do have the most impact?
Yeah, well, I think for small nonprofits, I can imagine 2 or 3 things that everybody can do. So one is, there's a lot of larger nonprofits or larger efforts like the Obama campaign have the luxury of doing a lot of experiments to test things, what works, what doesn't work. And once you've tested those, they apply equally to a lot of nonprofits, right? So I've worked since elections with a lot of nonprofits in kind of helping them, here's how you should do online fundraising better. Like, here are 6 things you can do that'll increase your fundraising by 30% in a month, right? Because there's some pretty low-hanging fruit that people, it's just a lot of cost of learning those things. And once you've learned them, so fundraising is an easy one where if you're getting grassroots funding, you can improve fundraising pretty significantly by just doing fairly simple things. So one example of that we sort of learned, and this is pure manipulation, but it works. So we would email people and say, hey, would you give us $34 or more? And they would click on that email and go to a web page. Now the web page has different options, they'll say. And so you could say, the first option is 40, next is 100, 300, and there's an empty box. And you can fill out the 34 if you want to work that, but people are lazy. So they click on the 40, right? So what you've done is now upsold them by $6, and that's, it's worth it. Now you could be really greedy and say, well, I'm going to put the first box to be $100, and then still give them an empty box to put in 34. People are lazy. They're going to just close the window because 100 is too much. So you sort of figure out the right way to get them to, the email gets them primed for giving money. The web page gets them to pick the exact amount, and you can really figure out the right way of doing it. Pretty much every nonprofit that does grassroots fundraising online can use this to really figure out the right way to ask their supporters for money. The other thing you can do, which I think is, every nonprofit sort of has a group that they are trying to improve, right, in some way. They have their target group. Now, the entire group, they want to target the entire group. Let's say you're going after, people who are living in, or homeless, and you'd like to improve everybody's life, but maybe the tactics you're using are really effective in a certain subset. If you could figure out what subset you're more effective in, you can start targeting more of them, because that's where you can move the needle the most. And right now, people don't really do that, because you sort of need to look at, you need to sort of invest a little bit in that strategy of saying, I'm going to treat everyone and see which ones see the most improvement, follow them for a couple of years and see where the benefits are the most, and then take my resources and put them towards, so this is the kind of work we're doing with this nurse-family partnership, where they treat, the home visitation program for nurses. Nurses go into homes with first-time, typically teen, young, expecting mothers, and help them sort of through that process. We're working with them to figure out what kind of people they have the most impact on. so that they could put in their resources and really focus on those people. Whereas some other organization who is good at something else can focus their efforts on those people. So I think even for smaller organizations, there is a way of doing that. So, yeah.
Hi. I'm relaying actually a question from my students. I teach a business intelligence course at the University of Arkansas Little Rock, Department of Business Information Systems. And their major question, how do I sell myself as a business analyst? The second question for me is, what are some of the major highlights, tools, methodologies, processes that helped you succeed in your job for us to consider in our curriculum? Thank you.
Those are really long answers. Yeah, maybe we can talk afterwards about. I mean, there's no short answer to that. But we can talk afterwards after we're done. So, any short questions?
One last short question.
How do I change the world?
One last short question.
I don't know if this is short or not, but how did you end up at the University of Chicago with this program?
Yeah, fairly randomly. So I live in Chicago. The University of Chicago is in Chicago. That happens to be. I think the main reason for me of ending up there was the program kind of happened independently of the university. I decided I want to do this program. Eric Schmidt, who's the chairman of Google now, he decided, he was around in the campaign quite a bit, so we were chatting about what I'm doing, and he said, oh, I'll fund this program if you want. So that was nice. He's funding it again this summer, so it's without the funding, none of this could have happened. But Chicago was an interesting place because it had all the social science infrastructure already there. It's a really strong quantitative social science place where people are working in economics and sociology and the policy school. And that's the kind of, the point of the program was to bring people together from different areas. So going into a strong engineering tech university was not the right place to go because you need to bring these things together. Chicago happened to have, I can bring in the tech side of things, I can't bring in the policy, the social science. So that happened to be a really nice mixture of the right place for that. And then the second thing that was sort of attracted me to Chicago is, as a city, it sort of, we struggle with some of these problems that are local. And there is enough infrastructure there that have been collecting data. So the ideal organization that we were working with would have sort of, problems that have huge impact, but they've sort of done the first piece of they've started collecting data, but don't know how to take the next step. And that's kind of how one of our partners, the Mesa Public School, came to us and said, well, we've spent the past few years, a lot of our kids go to this community college that has a 12% graduation rate. We think they can do better. We've been spending the past 7 years collecting this data, and then we bought a copy of this software called SPSS, which is a stats tool, but we don't know what to do with it. Can you help? So I think that was also Chicago as an infrastructure that had been collecting information, but hadn't done anything with it. So we were able to kind of go in and do some of these things pretty quickly.
Well, thank you so much for coming to the Clinton School. Thank all of you for coming out this afternoon.